Blood scattered across the wooden floor as Grace Evans' bare feet pounded against the rough planks, her heart racing faster than her trembling legs could carry her. It was 1876, in the unforgiving territory of Wyoming, and she had finally found the courage to leave the man who had promised to love her, but instead taught her the meaning of fear. The cool night air bit at her skin as she fled into the darkness, her thin cotton nightgown offering little protection against the elements. Behind her, the imposing two-story house that had been her prison for the past 2 years grew smaller, but the terror of what would happen if Franklin caught her remained enormous in her mind. She could still hear his drunken shouts, still feel the sting of his hand across her cheek. Tonight had been worse than ever before, and she knew if she stayed, she might not live to see another sunrise. Grace had married Franklin Hobbs at 18, swept away by his charm and promises of a comfortable life. He was older, established, and respected in Buffalo Springs. Nobody would believe the truth about what happened behind closed doors. Nobody except her childhood friend Liam Foster, who had warned her about Franklin's reputation before she married him. As she reached the edge of their property, a sob escaped her lips. The road stretched ahead, dark and uninviting, but still more welcoming than the home she was leaving behind. Her bare feet were already cut and bleeding from the sharp stones and twigs, but the physical pain was nothing compared to what she was escaping. 3 miles away, Liam Foster sat on the porch of his modest ranch house, unable to sleep. At 25, he had built something to be proud of, a small but thriving cattle operation that was finally turning a profit. But success felt hollow knowing Grace was trapped in a marriage he suspected had turned sour. He had seen the bruises she tried to hide when they occasionally crossed paths in town, noticed how her once bright eyes had dimmed, how her smile never reached them anymore. A strange feeling pulled at him tonight, a restlessness he couldn't shake. Something was wrong. He took one last look at the star-filled sky before deciding to saddle up Thunder, his faithful black stallion, for a late-night ride to clear his head. He had been riding for less than 20 minutes when he spotted a ghostly figure staggering along the road. The moon broke through the clouds just enough to illuminate a woman in a white nightgown, moving with desperate determination despite her obvious pain. "Grace," he called out, disbelieving. She turned, her face pale with fear until recognition dawned. "Liam," she breathed, relief flooding her features before she collapsed to her knees. In an instant, he was off his horse and at her side, his strong arms supporting her. "What happened? What are you doing out here alone?" "I had to leave," she whispered, her voice shaking as much as her body. "He would have killed me tonight, I know it." Liam's jaw tightened as he took in her condition, the bruise forming on her cheekbone, the split in her lip, and her bloodied feet. "I'm getting you out of here," he said firmly, lifting her into his arms. Grace clutched at his shirt. "He'll come looking for me. He always says no one leaves Franklin Hobbs." "Let him try," Liam said with quiet determination as he gently placed her on Thunder's back before mounting behind her. "I won't let him hurt you again." He turned his horse toward his ranch, aware that what he was doing could be seen as stealing another man's wife, a serious offense in these parts. But looking down at Grace's battered form leaning against his chest, he knew he would face whatever consequences came. They rode hard through the night, Liam constantly checking behind them for signs of pursuit. Grace drifted in and out of consciousness, the adrenaline that had fueled her escape now fading, revealing the full extent of her exhaustion and injuries. By the time they reached his ranch, the first hints of dawn were lighting the eastern sky. His foreman, Miguel, was already up tending to the morning chores and looked up in surprise as Liam rode in with a woman in his arms. "Miguel, I need hot water and bandages in the house," Liam called as he carefully dismounted, still cradling Grace. The older man took one look at Grace's condition and nodded, hurrying ahead to open the door. "I will wake Maria to help," he said, referring to his wife who helped keep Liam's house. Inside, Liam gently laid Grace on his bed. Her eyes fluttered open, momentarily confused before settling on his face. "You came for me," she murmured. "I always would," he replied softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It was then he noticed the dark bruises around her neck, partially hidden by her long hair, and his blood boiled. Grace, what did he do to you? She turned her face away. He found out I'd been saving money, planning to leave. He said he'd rather see me dead than let me go. Maria entered with a basin of warm water and clean cloths. She was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who had taken care of Liam since he'd started his ranch. She clucked her tongue sympathetically as she assessed Grace's injuries. "You men, out," she ordered. "I will take care of the senora." Liam reluctantly left, joining Miguel in the kitchen where the foreman was preparing coffee. "This is Hobbs' wife, no?" Miguel asked quietly. Liam nodded, running a hand through his hair. "He's been beating her. Tonight was the worst. She ran barefoot all the way from their place." Miguel's weathered face hardened. "That man has a bad reputation. They say his first wife disappeared mysteriously." "I know," Liam said grimly, "but what can I do? The law won't intervene in a man's marriage, and Hobbs has the sheriff in his pocket." "You already did what a man of honor must do," Miguel replied, passing him a cup of strong coffee. "Now we prepare for what comes next." What came next arrived sooner than expected. Maria had just finished tending to Grace's wounds, and Grace had fallen into an exhausted sleep when the sound of approaching horses reached them. Liam looked out the window to see Franklin Hobbs leading 4 men toward the ranch house. "Miguel, get the rifles," Liam said quietly. "And make sure Maria stays with Grace." He stepped onto the porch just as Franklin dismounted. The man was tall and broad, with a thick mustache and cold eyes. At 45, he was still imposing, dressed in an expensive suit despite the early hour. "Foster," he called out, his voice deceptively pleasant. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Liam stood his ground. "No one belongs to anyone, Hobbs. Grace is here, yes, but she's not your property." Franklin's face darkened. "That's my wife you've stolen, boy." "The law's on my side in this." "The law doesn't give you the right to beat a woman half to death," Liam replied, aware of Miguel coming to stand beside him, rifle in hand. "I've seen what you did to her. She ran 3 miles barefoot to escape you." Franklin smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My wife is prone to hysteria and self-harm. I'm simply here to take her home and ensure she gets the medical attention she needs." The men with Franklin shifted uncomfortably, and Liam realized they weren't all willingly part of this. Franklin had likely told them a different story. "She's not going anywhere with you," Liam stated firmly. "Not today, not ever." Franklin's smile vanished. "You're making a mistake, Foster. I'm a patient man, but I have my limits. Step aside and let me collect my wife." "You'll have to kill me first," Liam said simply. For a moment, tension crackled in the air, then Franklin laughed. "Have it your way. But remember, I own half this territory. No one will sell to you, buy from you, or do business with you after today, and when my wife comes to her senses, which she will, I'll be waiting." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Foster, when she's back home where she belongs, I'll make sure she pays for every minute she spent with you." With that threat hanging in the air, Franklin and his men rode away. Liam watched until they disappeared from sight, knowing this was far from over. Inside, he found Grace sitting up in bed, her face pale with fear. "He's going to destroy you," she whispered. "You shouldn't have helped me." Liam sat beside her, taking her trembling hands in his. "I would do it again in a heartbeat. You don't understand. Franklin never loses. He'll burn your ranch to the ground before he lets me go." "Then let him try," Liam said with quiet determination, "because I'm not letting you go back to him." Grace looked into his eyes, seeing something there she hadn't allowed herself to notice before. "Why are you doing this, Liam? Why risk everything for me?" He hesitated, then spoke the truth he'd held inside for years. "Because I've loved you since we were children, Grace." "I should have told you before you married him. Maybe if I had." "Don't," she interrupted, tears filling her eyes. "We can't change the past." "No, but we can fight for the future," he replied, gently squeezing her hands. "Rest now, you're safe here." As predicted, Franklin's influence made itself felt immediately. The general store refused to sell supplies to Liam's ranch hands. The cattle buyer who had agreed to purchase Liam's herd suddenly found problems with the contract. The bank called in a loan that wasn't due for another 6 months. But for every obstacle, Liam found a way around it. He sent Miguel to the next town over for supplies. He made arrangements with a cattle buyer from Colorado. He sold 2 prized horses to cover the loan. Meanwhile, Grace slowly began to heal, both physically and emotionally. She insisted on helping around the ranch despite Maria's protests. Having been raised on a farm before her marriage, she was no stranger to hard work, and it gave her purpose. One evening, about 2 weeks after her escape, Liam found her sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Her bruises had faded to yellow shadows, and there was color in her cheeks again. "You look better," he said, settling into the chair beside her. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I feel better, like I'm coming back to myself." "I've missed that Grace," he admitted. "The one who used to race me to the swimming hole and beat me more often than not," she laughed, the sound startling them both. "I had forgotten about that. You always claimed I cheated." "Because you did," he protested with a grin. "You always took shortcuts through the Wilson property." "That's not cheating, that's strategy," she countered, her eyes sparkling with amusement. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky transformed into a canvas of orange and pink. Then Grace's expression grew serious. "Franklin won't give up, you know. He sees me as his possession, and he hates losing more than anything." Liam nodded. "I know, but we can't live in fear of him forever." "We?" she questioned softly. He turned to face her. "Yes, we, unless you don't want to stay." Grace looked down at her hands. "I'm still married to him, Liam, in the eyes of the law and the church. There are ways to end a marriage, especially one where there's been cruelty," Liam said carefully. "It won't be easy, but it's possible." "And then what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then you're free to do whatever you want, go wherever you want." He paused. "Stay if you want." She looked up at him, vulnerability and hope mingling in her expression. "Is that what you want, for me to stay?" "More than anything," he admitted, "but only if it's what you want too." Grace reached out tentatively and placed her hand over his. "I think it might be, when I'm ready." It was a small step, but a significant one. And for the first time since she had fled barefoot into the night, Grace felt something like hope for the future. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Thomas Reed rode up to the ranch alone, his expression grim. Liam met him outside, tension evident in his stance. "Foster," the sheriff greeted him with a nod. "I need to speak with Mrs. Hobbs." "Whatever you have to say to her, you can say to me," Liam replied, blocking the way to the house. The sheriff sighed. "I'm not here on Hobbs' behalf, though I know that's what you're thinking. This is official business." Before Liam could respond, Grace appeared behind him. "It's all right, Liam. I'll speak with the sheriff." Despite her brave words, her hand sought Liam's for support. Inside, the sheriff removed his hat, revealing graying hair. "Mrs. Hobbs, I'm here because we've received some concerning information about your husband." Grace tensed. "What kind of information?" "A woman's body was discovered yesterday near the creek that runs through the Peterson farm. She's been identified as Catherine Miller, who worked as a maid in your household about a year ago." Grace gasped, her face draining of color. "Catherine. But Franklin said she ran off with a traveling salesman." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Well, unless she ran off after being strangled to death, that's not what happened. And there's more. We found a shallow grave near your property line containing what we believe are the remains of your husband's first wife." Liam moved closer to Grace, his arm going around her protectively. "Are you saying Hobbs killed them both?" "We're investigating that possibility," the sheriff replied. "But we need Mrs. Hobbs' help. She may have information that could be crucial." Grace nodded slowly, her mind racing. "There was a night, about a month before Catherine disappeared, I heard them arguing. Franklin was drunk and he accused her of stealing from him. The next morning, he had scratches on his face that he claimed came from a branch while he was checking the property line." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "And his first wife, Alina, he always said she left him for another man, but he kept her things. All of them, locked in a trunk in the attic. I found it once and he was furious, said I had no right to touch her belongings." The sheriff nodded, making notes. "That's helpful, Mrs. Hobbs. Would you be willing to testify to this if it comes to a trial?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes to see justice done." After the sheriff left, Grace sat in stunned silence. "I knew he was capable of cruelty, but murder, I lived with a monster and never realized the full extent of it." Liam knelt before her. "This isn't your fault, Grace. He fooled a lot of people." "But I married him," she whispered. "I chose this." "You were 18 and he showed you only what he wanted you to see," Liam argued gently. The man is twice your age and has been manipulating people for decades. She looked at him, fresh tears in her eyes. What if they don't find enough evidence? What if he gets away with it? He'll come for me, Liam, and he'll come for you too. I won't let that happen, he promised, though they both knew it wasn't entirely in his power to prevent it. The next few days passed in a state of anxious waiting. Then word came that Franklin Hobbs had fled town, presumably after learning of the sheriff's investigation. A manhunt was underway, but he had a significant head start. While this brought temporary relief, it also meant living with constant vigilance. Liam doubled the night watch on the ranch, and Grace never ventured far from the house alone. Despite these precautions, life on the ranch continued. As weeks passed without sign of Franklin, they began to hope he had fled the territory entirely. Grace's divorce proceedings began in her absence, aided by testimonies about Franklin's abuse and the pending murder investigations. It was during this time that the relationship between Liam and Grace deepened. They rediscovered their old friendship and found it transforming into something more profound. Yet both were careful, aware of the shadows still hanging over them and the fact that Grace was, legally at least, still married. One afternoon in late summer, they rode out to check on a new calf born the previous night. The day was perfect clear blue skies, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers, and the distant mountains standing majestically against the horizon. "I'd forgotten how beautiful Wyoming can be," Grace remarked as they dismounted near a small stream to let the horses drink. Liam watched her as she gazed across the landscape. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes for so long was fading, replaced by a quiet strength. "It is beautiful," he agreed, though his eyes never left her face. She turned, catching his gaze, and a blush colored her cheeks. "What? Nothing," he said with a small smile. "I'm just glad to see you happy again." "I am," she admitted. "Despite everything, I'm happy here with you." The simple admission hung in the air between them, significant in its honesty. Liam stepped closer, his heart hammering in his chest. "Grace, I know your divorce isn't final yet, and I know it's too soon to ask for promises, but I want you to know that whenever you're ready, if you ever want it, there's a place for you here. Not just as my guest, but as..." "As what?" she prompted when he hesitated. "As my wife," he said quietly. "If that's something you might want someday." Grace's eyes widened, but before she could respond, the crack of a rifle shot split the air. Liam felt a searing pain in his arm as he instinctively pushed Grace to the ground, covering her body with his own. "Well, isn't this touching?" came a familiar voice. Franklin Hobbs emerged from the trees, rifle in hand. He looked haggard, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled, his eyes wild with rage and something darker. "My wife and her lover, planning their future while I'm hunted like an animal." "Franklin," Grace gasped, terror freezing her blood. "Please don't do this." "Shut up," he snarled, aiming the rifle at them. "You destroyed everything I built, my reputation, my standing in the community, all because you couldn't be a proper wife." Liam shifted slightly, keeping his body between Grace and the rifle. Blood seeped through his shirt sleeve where the bullet had grazed him. "It's over, Hobbs. The sheriff knows what you did to those women. You can't escape justice forever." Franklin laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "Justice? There's no justice in this world, only power, and I still have enough power to make sure neither of you lives to see another day." As he raised the rifle again, Grace made a decision. She would not cower in fear any longer. With a sudden move, she pushed Liam aside and stood up, facing her husband. "No more, Franklin. You don't control me anymore," Franklin's face contorted with rage. "You dare defy me after everything I gave you." "You gave me nothing but pain and fear," Grace replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And I won't let you hurt anyone else I care about." As Franklin's finger tightened on the trigger, a shot rang out but not from his rifle. He stumbled forward, a look of surprise crossing his face before he collapsed to the ground. Behind him stood Sheriff Reed, his gun still smoking. "Mrs. Hobbs, Mr. Foster, are you both all right?" Grace rushed to Liam's side, examining his wounded arm with trembling hands. "He's been shot, but I think it's just a graze." The sheriff approached Franklin's still form and checked for signs of life. "He's dead," he confirmed grimly. "We've been tracking him for days. Lucky we got here when we did." As the sheriff's deputies arrived to take charge of the scene, Grace held tightly to Liam, the reality of how close they had come to death washing over her. "It's really over now," she whispered. Liam pulled her closer with his good arm. "Yes, it's over, and we can start thinking about the future." The months that followed brought healing in many forms. Franklin Hobbs was buried with little ceremony, his crimes now public knowledge. The investigations confirmed he had indeed murdered his first wife and the young maid, along with two other women whose disappearances had gone largely unremarked. Grace's divorce was granted on grounds of extreme cruelty, a process expedited by the circumstances. She stayed on at Liam's ranch, gradually taking on more responsibilities and finding purpose in the work and in helping others who had suffered similar fates. A shelter for abused women was established in town, funded in part by the sale of Franklin's properties, which Grace had inherited and promptly sold. It became her mission to ensure no woman felt as trapped as she once had. Winter came, blanketing the land in pristine white. On Christmas Eve, Liam found Grace standing by the window watching the snow fall. The house was warm and festive, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, a fire crackling in the hearth. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. She turned to him with a smile. "I was just thinking about how different this Christmas is from last year. I spent it locked in my room after Franklin threw a fit about the dinner being overcooked." Liam frowned at the memory. "I hate thinking of you there, alone and afraid." "But I'm not alone anymore," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "And I'm not afraid," he interlaced his fingers with hers. "No, you're the bravest person I know." Grace looked up at him, her heart full. Over these months, their love had grown steadily, built on a foundation of respect, friendship, and shared dreams. "Do you remember what you asked me that day by the stream, before Franklin showed up?" Liam's heart skipped a beat. "I remember. You asked if being your wife was something I might want someday." She took a deep breath. "My answer is yes, not someday but now, if you still want that." Joy spread across Liam's face. "Grace Evans, I have wanted that since we were 16 years old. Nothing would make me happier than to make you my wife." He drew her into his arms, and as their lips met in a tender kiss, Grace knew she had finally found where she belonged. Not as someone's possession, but as an equal partner in love and life. They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in a simple ceremony attended by friends and neighbors. The ranch flourished under their joint care, as did the shelter in town. Over the years, they welcomed 3 children, 2 daughters, and a son, raising them with love and teaching them the value of respect and equality. Sometimes at night, Grace would wake from nightmares of her past, but Liam was always there, his steady presence chasing away the shadows. And on summer evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant colors, grateful for the life they had built together. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they met, they would share a look, deciding which version to tell. Sometimes it was the childhood friendship, the swimming races and tree-climbing adventures. Other times, they spoke of second chances and the courage it takes to start anew. But they never forgot that desperate night when she fled barefoot from her husband's house, and the cowboy rode hard to gather her onto his horse the night that ended one chapter of their lives and began another, more beautiful story.